Hi, friends. Welcome to Life Mastery TV, your source for inspiration, empowerment, and fulfillment. My name is David McLeod. I am your Life Mastery coach and author of the book, A Life to Die For, and also one of the co-authors of the best-selling series, The Wellness Universe Guide to Complete Self-Care. This is Life Mastery TV, episode number 204, and our topic title today is Releasing Obligations. Now, each of us experiences a process in our life of conditioning that starts shortly after we arrive here on the physical plane. The process begins as our parents or primary caregivers teach us all the rules that we're supposed to learn and follow. If we fail to observe a rule, we usually also experience escalating levels of punishment. Not because anyone is deliberately trying to hurt us, but because the people in charge believe that we really need to learn these rules in order to mature into upstanding citizens in our communities. As we grow up, the responsibility for enhancing and expanding our learning is transferred to other authority figures in our lives. This list grows progressively larger over time to include school teachers, religious mentors, law enforcement officials, medical professionals, political leaders, and many others. The implied message that underscores all of this couldn't be much clearer, really. What it says is we're not qualified to make our own decisions in our lives or about our lives. And we must be indoctrinated and molded into an acceptable way of being. It turns out, unfortunately, that most of us believe this unspoken message, especially when we are young. And we unconsciously do whatever we can to live up to these obligations that are handed to us so that we don't upset the apple cart, so to speak. Now, the problem with all of this is that in going along to get along, the weight of those obligations continues to grow. We end up disconnecting from our true selves in the bargain, and we may not even realize we've made these choices or done these things until we're in our 40s or even later, and we're wondering why we're so unhappy or unfulfilled. Sooner or later, though, the realization hits us right between the ears, and then we're faced with a bigger choice about what we're going to do going forward. So in today's episode of Life Mastery TV, we're going to consider some of the options we have available to us as we face this turning point in our lives. And I've invited Reverend Tomás Garza to join me for this conversation. Tomás brings his background as a coach, mentor, and student of A Course in Miracles to the table. He's got lots of background, lots of experience, along with years of experience in dealing with this very issue. So please join me in welcoming Tomás Garza to our show today. Hello, Tomás. Welcome.
Hello, David. Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. This is going to be fun.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to say for the people watching is that Tomás and I met through a book writing collaboration that we did recently, and you might have heard of it. I've certainly talked about it on my own channels, but it's a book called Find Your Voice, Save Your Life, Volume 4, Transcendent Men, Real Stories. I'm going to put a link in the chat here so you can grab a copy of that book if you like. But before I'm going to just give you a chance to speak, Tomás, and I wanted to say, each of us contributed a chapter to that book, and I know that your chapter had to do with this idea of obligations. So why don't you kind of start there? Tell us a little bit about your story so we understand why this topic is so important to you.
All right. Well, yes, this is it's chapter 12 of this book. By the way, David's chapter is chapter 13. So, yes.
Yeah, I'm 13. That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
We're chapter buddies.
We are. And who knew, right? Who knew? Yes, but this is something that is really, really central to my experience because I bought into, as many people do, a tremendous amount of obligation, of social pressure, and of conditioning, and found myself at a couple of different points in my life depressed and really unhappy, feeling as though I wasn't living my own life. And once was in my 20s, and then it came again in my late 30s. So it's something that has come up as a thing quite prominently.
Right. And so, so tell me a little bit more about what happened. Where did these obligations come from in your life, and how did they impact you? You talked a little bit about depression and unhappiness, but what else was going on for you?
Well, what was going on is I was fortunate enough to grow up in a family that valued education, for which I'm deeply grateful. And I'm also deeply grateful that I enjoyed school, because even one of my own children does not enjoy school, so you just never know. But I happened to enjoy it, and I did well, which in this particular family structure heaped pressure on me to do certain things. And there was a message that was both spoken and unspoken, that in this family we have certain roles to play and nothing less will do. And in this family structure, which happily emphasized education, happily emphasized travel and the learning of languages, things that have really benefited me in this lifetime. Along with that came the weight and pressure to do one of three things, because this is just what we do. One, doctor. Two, lawyer. Three, prominent politician. That's what a good person does. And it was definitely about the status of those professions. And it was definitely, even when I was a kid, not my idea of how I was going to live my life, but the message just kept getting pounded in and pounded in. And of course, it was reinforced by the fact that I did well in school. So all of my teachers reinforced this message. And come my 20s, I found myself in law school. So that's really the background of all of this.
So you went to law school. Did you also go to medical school and become a politician?
No, happily no. Just law school,
Right.
and I'm avoiding becoming a politician. And my dad is an orthopedic surgeon, so my granddad was also a doctor. My mom was a nurse. I have a sister that's a nurse, so I have a lot of people in my family that went that route. But I decided not to do that.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. I remember, when I was a kid, uh, what was calling me in my heart was music. I wanted to be a musician. I loved playing guitar. I loved creating songs. I loved singing. I loved performing, and I was actually, pretty good at it. And so by the time I was about 15, I was pretty sure that that's what I want to do. I want to be a rock and roll musician. Of course, that wasn't really an acceptable thing in my family, and there were plenty of messages that I got that, things like, for every successful musician, there's a million starving musicians and all that kind of stuff. They really tried to, I don't know if they were doing this deliberately, but what they were trying to do in their minds was be realistic. And what they effectively did for me was they created this fear that said, oh, I better not do that then, And so I then went into a process of saying, well, I got the other message, the explicit message. Choose something that you like that will give you, long-term opportunities. And so I would make suggestions along the way about different kinds of things that might be alternatives to being a rock and roll musician. And all of them were, nah, that's not good enough. It wasn't until I said fighter pilot that I saw the lights go on. And my stepfather at the time, who was himself a fighter pilot, and my mom both thought, oh, this is a great idea. You're going to go to the military, get great upbringing, blah, blah, blah. So that was kind of my experience. And some of these messages, as you say, were explicit, they were spoken out, and some of them were very subversive, shall we say. They were underneath the covers, and we kids were not stupid. We read between the lines. We say, oh, this makes mommy and daddy happy, this doesn't. And so we end up choosing what we think is going to make them happy.
Yes, and what seems, and may seem weird right now that we've reached middle age, is that how easy it is to buy into that. And I simply developed a tunnel vision, and just the weight of all of this obligation, the weight of all of this family and social pressure was so much that I grew to think that that was really the only big or important thing that I could do. And of the three, doctor, lawyer, politician, I chose the law school route almost by default. But it was just very, now that I look back, it was very powerful, this conditioning, very powerful.
Oh yeah, it is powerful. And I use the word subversive, not so much because anyone's trying to necessarily control us in a negative way, but because the people who are giving us these messages are only doing it, I think, because that's what they learned. They learned exactly the same thing, and they think that this is what it means to be a good parent, to raise my kid, to obey all the rules, to do all the right things, to find a job, to get married, to settle down, to have kids, to have this house, all these things that we are kind of pushed into doing. Being told all the while, this will make you happy, this will give you fulfillment, this will make you, a successful member of society. And yet, when we get to our 30s or 40s, and I'm sure that this happened to you too, we look back and say, well, wait a minute, I did all those things. How come I don't have all that happiness that you promised me? How come I don't have all the success that you promised me? What has gone wrong? And that's really, I think, where the meat of our conversation really goes to.
Well, it is. And once I matriculated in law school, I did take a year off, and I know a number of my classmates went directly from undergraduate school to graduate school. I took a year off and worked in between, and worked and partied and had some really, really beautiful and fun times.
You worked, did you?
Yes, it passed for work and paid the bill.
Right.
But a lot of other work involved. It was a party scene, and I was 23, so you can just about imagine. And by the time I got to law school, I quickly found myself out of place. I found myself really, really miserable, in fact, because of the overall attitude that people had, and the amount of pressure that existed within the structure of the school itself, the education, and the word versus, that is the foundational centerpiece of our legal system. So-and-so v. so-and-so, Roe v. Wade, Brown v. Board of Education, lots of versus.
Right.
All of
it's competition. Yeah.
Yeah, intense competition for what? For a possible job in the future at a large, prestigious law firm that may or may not come. And I know people that took those jobs. And as I went out partying in my mid-20s, this is after I had graduated, they'd gone on to take some of these jobs that were force-fed us. This is what you do. This is what you do. You clerk for a large law firm. You may or may not make partner. This is how you do it. This is the successful way. And I found myself not buying that at all. They would go past me as I was coming out of a pub at 11 or 12 o'clock at night. They were on their way back to the office because they had taken a dinner break and were pulling an all-nighter because, well, their senior partner wanted them to. And I was grateful at that time that I didn't choose that route, but I really suffered through law school. And by the way, I did graduate in the end. I made myself plow through. So that was also part of my conditioning is get through it.
Yeah, that's really fascinating too. And I know that I had the same kind of experience. When I made the decision to become a fighter pilot, then I had all the obstacles associated with just achieving that goal. First of all, I'm sure you heard something similar when you were going into law school. There's 10,000 people applying to be a fighter pilot, and only one or two are going to make it, kind of thing. And I said, that doesn't matter. I never thought about it as I was going to be one of the 999 or 9,998 that didn't make it. I said, oh, good. There's a place for me and somebody else. That's the way I thought about it. And then I just knuckled down and I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And I did it. I became a fighter pilot. Now, I'm not saying that to brag. What I am saying is there's a powerful learning here, and I'm sure you experienced it yourself. Even if you're involved in the most unpleasant of duties, when you really set your mind to it, you can do it. Now imagine what you can do when you're involved in something that really fulfills you and is, calling from your heart. How much more could you do? That's a big learning that I got out of that experience. And so, I don't know, did you have that kind of a wake up for yourself?
Yes. Yes, I did. And that is exactly my learning as well, is how much more can you do when you're doing what you're called to do, when you know what you're called to do and your heart tells you to do, and you go forward with that. That is powerful. And yeah, it takes us a long time, decades sometimes, to really start with that because we have so much else to go through.
Right.
And that determination that you experienced in becoming a fighter pilot was something that I also can relate to because I never had any doubts that I would get into law school. I knew that I would be accepted, and I was, and that wouldn't be an issue. I also knew that I would graduate once I began because I know my own willpower. And there was a lot of suffering that went into that, but there were never doubts about those two things at all, really.
Right. And it's interesting that you mentioned the word suffering. I think that's something that each of us has our own experience of suffering. We all have our own personal definition of what that really means. But what I think of is there were plenty of aspects of my life that I didn't like, that I wouldn't want to go through again. And I guess in some way, when I was going through them, I may have thought about them as suffering. But today I look at them very differently. I see those past experiences as part of the journey that helped to get me to where I am today. Had I not gone through those things, I might have ended up here, but maybe by a completely different route. But the fact of the matter is, every one of those experiences in my life helped me to learn something or to become more aware of something or to develop some aspect of myself that I might not have otherwise done. And I think that part really is important. So I guess at the time I went through it, I probably did say, God, I hate this. This is just, this is hell that I'm going through right now, and I'm suffering. I may have used words like that in my mind, but today I go back and I think about it. Was I really suffering? I mean, actually, no, because here I am. Here I am, and I feel quite happy with how I got here, with what I'm doing today, and all these things. I don't know. Does that resonate for you?
Big time. Yeah, big time. It really does. There's a reason why I went through each and every of these experiences, which seemed like tremendous obstacles at the time. It really did. Well, it sucked, quite frankly, to have so much freaking homework and reading and people's attitude. I made friends with a lot of people. I'm still friends with so many of the folks that I went to school with. And this was back in the 90s. But the attitude of a lot of people was just cutthroat and competitive and so fear-based that I could not bring myself to be a part of that. So even after I graduated, which I also did because I was paying for it at the time with my own money. So there was that component.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, having done that, I was damn sure going to go through and I was going to graduate. And when I did, I made the decision not to sit for the bar exam. So I am not a practicing attorney. So I did make that decision. Wasn't popular with my family, as you can imagine. Wasn't popular with my friends. It wasn't popular with my wife at the time, who's now my former wife. It wasn't popular with her, and that was not the sole reason that we got divorced, but it was a contributing factor. And I really, truly just couldn't see myself doing what these people, my classmates, were doing for 40 to 50 years. I knew there was something more to it than that. So it was a decision that was really quite easy for me to make. Surprised me, in fact. And I think that it was easy because it was what I was meant to do. I thought that it would be harder to say, no, I don't want to do this. I'm not going that route. But it was just like breathing, like waking up in the morning.
All right. Well, I think judging by what you're saying, you're obviously a lot more awake and aware and intelligent than I was, because when I got out of the military in 1981, I immediately went into another thing. I was kind of fascinated with computers, so I became a software engineer, and I stayed in that kind of business for almost 35 years. But I mean, at some point, at the early stages, yeah, I enjoyed developing software. I enjoyed engaging my creativity and all that kind of stuff. But I really wasn't fulfilled. So here I was in a second career that also wasn't really truly my calling. So at least, some people wake up and that's all it takes is one wake up. No, not for me. I've needed several. And it wasn't until I was probably well into my 50s that I realized, okay, I got to make a change. I got to do something different. And in fact, it was 2003 when I did my carpet work, about which I wrote in my chapter. That's when everything kind of woke up, but by that time I was already 50 years old. So you could figure out the other delta from there. Yeah, I'm well into my 60s now, and I'm very happy with my life. But I have to say, it took me a great deal of time to figure this all out.
Yeah. I have to tell you, I don't know about the more intelligent. I think I did the same thing. Yeah, definitely I was not more intelligent in my 20s, because I also chose a horrid second career, horrid for me, second career that was not fulfilling. This is something that I write about in my chapter. But I needed more time as well. I needed more self-imposed suffering and more mental, emotional, excruciating friggin' torture. I needed all of that, because rather than just after law school, after graduating, refusing to sit for the bar, all of that stuff, which was good, I didn't go very far away. I chose a career that was very, very related to the legal profession, and that was mediation, alternative dispute resolution. So I didn't venture very far away. I wasn't ready at the time, and it just didn't occur to me to make a clean break. So I spent 13 years doing high stakes divorce and child custody mediation.
Oh, wow.
Which, drove me nuts. And that led all the way up to 2013. That's the actually, I wasn't in my 30s at all. I was in my early 40s, even when I finally let that go. So yes, there was a second career for me too that was probably every bit as brutal as if I had decided to become a practicing attorney. And in fact, there are several areas of law that would have been less brutal. But there I was.
Yeah. Well, I think about it, and I just think about my life, and here I am, 69 years old now, and I've kind of dabbled in the music industry a little bit. I've had a couple of little small bands here and there, but I never really took off as a musician, even though that was the one thing that I really wanted to do when I was, 14, 15 years old. Now, what would have happened had I become an actual musician? Maybe I would have died from a drug overdose. Who knows? You know, it's but it just interests me that even today, I mean, I still love music and I'm very involved in music, but in a different way than I was before. Now I bring my skills to do musical composition to support the work that I do. So meditation type music and, music that I include in my visualizations and stuff. So yeah, I still have that. But now what I see as my purpose is to just help people become aware of the truth of who they really are. And hopefully to help them to get that awareness when they're as young as possible so that they have the maximum amount of time to enjoy that. And so that's kind of where I see my purpose now. What about you?
Well, it's exactly the same, which I think is so remarkable about the connection that we all have, all of the authors of this book, and probably almost every single person watching or going back and listening to this, is that's what we're here for, is to serve as an example, to teach people to step into their own path, their own unique sense of who they are, which may or may not have anything to do with an occupation or a career or a job. But it would be really beautiful if everyone did what I wanted to do in my teens and did what I wanted again to do in my 20s and my 30s, to really pursue our spirituality, to pursue the truth of who we are and really focus on that journey. But I was most definitely not ready when I was younger. It was party time, and I was still obligated to be a great person, a good guy.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And yet the thing that I want to say is you can be a great guy and still not be crazy about partying. You can be a great guy who does a service to people or to the world without necessarily requiring any kind of recognition for it. And I think this is part of our journey. We have to understand that the recognition, the status, all those things that you mentioned earlier, those are so fleeting, and really they're not important at all. Even like having a PhD or that, I mean, okay, great. So you've got some education, but that doesn't make you really any smarter than anybody else. It perhaps makes you more educated than somebody, but not smarter. There are plenty of smart people who don't have PhDs out there.
Right.
And so status is not really what we want, although we might think we do, because that's the ego saying, oh, I got to be recognized, I got to be seen, I got to be this, I got to be that. But the reality is you can do great service to the world and still be behind the scenes and be humble. And, sure, you might be a public speaker and still be humble.
Yes.
There's lots of things that we can do. I wanted to ask you now, I know you had your own experience of these obligations and what was the impact on you, the cost in terms of your life. But when you speak to other people about obligations, how do you describe to them what the potential costs are?
Well, what I find myself doing is sharing my experience. And by the way, you're absolutely right. There are so many different ways that a person can make a valuable contribution. Not everybody has to turn on the camera and microphone like we do. I mean, this is my calling, to turn this camera and microphone on and share with people. And what I find really impactful is sharing my own experience, how I made countless mistakes when I was younger, buying into obligation, and how it's okay to realize that, well, sometimes it's so pervasive that we can't help it. We cannot help but be conditioned by our parents and our school teachers and the messages from society at large. We simply can't help it. There's nothing wrong with us or bad about us because we find ourselves in this position. It's just a question of, okay, what are we going to do once we become aware of this? Once we become aware that this way isn't working for me, there's got to be a better way.
Right. And when you get to that place of thinking this isn't working for me, there's got to be a better way, usually by that time, life starts looking as if you're banging your head against a wall. You know, you keep trying to do the same thing to get through this wall and it doesn't work. And you sooner or later have to realize, you know, this wall ain't going anywhere. I'm going to have to find a way around it, over it, under it, or if I can't get through it. So, yeah, and that means making a detour. So often that detour involves, well, I think for you talk about this, a change of mindset. You know, you got to change from the mind how you see things, how you perceive things, what you believe about things. You've got to understand, before you can even do that, you've got to understand what it is you already believe and what you think, you know? And so awareness becomes like the most important element of that. And then you have to accept what is right now, because you can't change anything until who was it? Solomon Pearls, I think. I'm not sure if I got his name right. He said, nothing changes until it becomes what it is. I remember when I first heard that, my mind just blew up. I said, what? Things are what they are. What are you talking about? But what I understood was something is what it is, but everything else is my story about it. So when I become aware of my story about what that thing is, and I remove that story, then I can see what the thing is. That is, in my view, true acceptance. Once you accept something, then you have the power to decide what you want to do about it. Shall it stay the same? Shall it change? What's going to happen? Is that kind of what you talk about in your teaching?
Well, it is. It is. And primarily, I teach a course in miracles. I also work with people on a modality known as Soul Path, which is about finding and living your life in the present moment on purpose, according to who you are here to be. And what's really going on here is just that. It's an awareness. This is why so many spiritual traditions emphasize awareness or mindfulness, why meditation is a thing in world spirituality and in pop culture nowadays even. It's about becoming aware, because we can't expect ourselves to solve a problem if we're not aware that we have it, first of all. And then again, we cannot, once we become aware, we can't solve it with the same things that have been, well, causing us distress. That's just attempting to manipulate the exterior form, choosing a different lover, right? Choosing a different partner, choosing a different job, right? Choosing a different color of shirt. Like, that's going to afford us lifelong happiness, right? We dance around and we dance around. And this is what I share my own experience when teaching, of dancing around the central issue, the core of everything, which is our mind. It's the core that's what we have to change. Right there is our mind. It's all about changing our mind. And it takes maturity to do that. It takes maturity to honestly assess your life and start questioning everything, for starters. And then it takes maturity to ask for help. And it takes maturity to stay on the path once you're on it, because you begin to see everything for what it is. And I'm really, really happy that you mentioned the acceptance and allowing things to be just as they are. That's what people find so difficult because we're indoctrinated, we're trained, we're cultured really to do everything a certain way, a way that other people have told us to do almost always. And as adults, we eventually hit the wall. We hit a point where we discover, okay, this just isn't, it's not working. It's not working for me at all. So, really, to circle back to my own experience, that's what I think when I share with people lands the most is sharing how I messed that up and denied my own inner calling, which has everything to do with spirituality. Now that I look back, it is all I have ever really cared about in this lifetime. Anyway, there
That's
was a
right.
reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a reason for all of it. There's a reason why I started meditating when I was a sophomore in high school. I had an old hippie geometry teacher who would have the class start meditating and spend a little bit of time, not long, but we would meditate at the beginning of high school geometry class. And of course, lots of kids rolled their eyes. They made fart noises. We're talking sophomores in high school.
Yeah,
They
right.
fidgeted. They did all kinds of things. And I actually found myself really connecting with it. And that actually has led to a lifelong practice. But as a young man, I was not in a place to allow myself to do what I'm doing now. And it wasn't time. It wasn't time. But I routinely chose other things because I had certain preconceived notions about being a spiritual teacher, about being a spiritual person. And well, yeah, I won't make enough money was one of the beliefs that I held, or I won't have the status that my parents and my grandparents want me to have. Yeah, well, it's not about that, but try telling me at the time.
Yeah. And you know what? All of those things might actually be true, that you won't have the same kind of money, you won't have the same kind of status. But what you will have is something that can't be evaluated in terms of simple dollars and status kind of
Right.
metrics. It's something that until you have it, it's really hard to understand what it is. And you
Mhm.
can't understand the value. And I think you kind of touched on it when you said that you started this meditation practice in your high school geometry class.
Yeah.
And you started connecting in to your spiritual nature, and you began to realize, well, that's where the real value is.
Mhm.
That's where the real money is, whatever word you want to say.
Yeah.
That's where the real treasure is.
Mhm.
So yeah, and so the other thing I wanted to mention, you mentioned soul path, and I wanted to come back and reiterate that, because you're not talking about soul path as in the path of the soul, but rather you're talking about soul as in one path, the path that you were intended to walk on, SOLE. Is that right?
Yes, that in fact that's correct. It's soul as in your own walk. Your own walk. And each of us has our own roles to play here.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has to turn on the microphone and camera and hold themselves out as a spiritual teacher or a minister or a coach or anything like that. That's not everyone's path. And everyone has gifts that they're here to share with the world. So, in that sense, yes, it's soul, SOLE, as in your unique path.
Right.
And you know what? The world needs everyone to be on purpose, so to speak, live life according to their own strengths, because this is something that I teach as well, is that everyone needs you to be at your best that you're capable of on a given day, right? Everyone needs you to show up and share with the world. There are people out there that will only respond to your message. Why? Because the two of you are ready for each other. So, who are we to deny other people that we don't even know necessarily personally? Not yet, anyway. Who are we to deny everyone that we're here to impact? And it's my job as a teacher to turn on this camera and microphone and show up and just teach. I don't know who's going to be watching. And that's really cool, in fact.
Yeah. It is cool. You just never know who's going to be paying attention to this. And
Mhm.
even if, like in this case, we have a live show going on, and we have a pretty small group here today. But what I have noticed is that people will come to this material and they'll listen to it or whatever when they're ready. And it isn't necessarily going to be on my schedule or your schedule. And the other thing that I remember, this has happened to me many times in my life, I might hear something on one day and it'll just kind of go in one ear and out the other. And then I might hear the same thing again weeks later, or maybe not hear it, but experience the same thing again. And again, in one ear and out the other. And this can go on any number of times. And it's not until I am ready, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times, 100 times, that I finally hear what was being said to me. And usually by the time it gets to 100, the intensity of the message has gone up too. That's the other thing I've noticed. But anyway, I finally wake up to it and say, oh, that's what you've been trying to tell me all these other times. I'm sure we all go through that on some level.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. We do. And I just want to comment that sometimes I feel like a teenager when that happens. And I just sit there with my still developing brain and say, oh.
Yeah, it's
okay.
Like the Homer Simpson look. Don't, slap the head.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's kind of something that we all go through. And it's not to make any of us wrong. And by the way, if your experience, by the way, friends, is to not hear a message until 20, 30, 40, 100, 1,000 times, that's nothing wrong with you. It's just that you weren't necessarily ready until that moment. So when you become ready, say, thank God I'm ready now. Just be grateful for that.
Yeah, it's huge. That's really, really huge. And that's an excellent point, because people can beat themselves up, and you may be out there beating yourself up right now for only just discovering this in your 40s and 50s. So what, right? There's nothing wrong with any of us. And it's just really important. This is an important conversation that we're having here, because everyone is conditioned one way or another. And the weight of obligation can be very heavy indeed. So if you've bought into it and you're only just now thinking, okay, well, I can do something different, then great. You have only the present moment in which to do something different. And it's understandable that we're not ready until we're ready, because I wasn't ready until I was ready.
That's
I mean,
right.
It sounds simple, but it's true.
Yeah, I know. Well, and I just did a podcast episode about this thing about being ready. In the grand scheme of things, if you're waiting to be ready, then you're going to be waiting for the rest of your life. It doesn't matter how much preparation you do before it's time to, get up on whatever it is you do, to get up and do what you have to do. There's always going to be one more thing that you could have done to make it better. But at some point, you have to say, this is good enough. For right now, this is as good as it gets. Let's go. And guess what happens? You're going to go and you're going to have your experience, whatever it is, and maybe you'll decide, wow, that was perfect just as it was. I didn't have to change a thing. Or maybe you'll say, that was really great, and I can see that if I do this next time, it's going to be just at the next level. But remember, not everything has to go to the next level. Maybe this is the next level.
Yes. And again, all we have is right now in which to make this decision. So it's incumbent upon us to reach for a better feeling in the present moment. It's incumbent on us to bring our awareness to where we are right now, not what happened 15 years ago. It's gone, and not where you think you should be and where you might be tomorrow or 15 minutes from now or anything like that. But right now, that's really all that we've got. And we're not just saying that, that's all that we've got. And when it comes to accepting what is, this is something that we deny all the time in our lives. We spend decades sometimes or lifetimes denying it. It is that everything is perfect. You are perfect as you are. Truth simply is. And it is a matter of our opening to that and accepting that.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, if we listen to our ego mind, then we are imperfect. But if we listen to our heart and soul, then we know we're perfect as we are. And that's the thing. We have a choice about what we listen to. We can listen to love coming from our heart and soul, or we can listen to fear coming from our ego mind. It's a choice. It's a choice. And in fact, I want to get back now to this. You mentioned A Course in Miracles. I've read through the material. I love that stuff. I'm not called to teach it, but I love the material and I really like to talk about it. So why don't you share with us a little bit about this notion of miracles and how accessible miracles are to people?
Yes. Okay. Well, yeah, I really appreciate that question. More accessible than you might imagine. But we tend to think of miracles as, well, as Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, or walking on water, taking a fish and a loaf of bread and multiplying it times 10,000, or if you prefer, Yoda or Luke Skywalker, Obi-Wan Kenobi. These are not the droids you're looking for. Right? A Jedi trick. Yeah. And then the stormtrooper says, these are not the droids we're looking for. Move along, right? We tend to think of that as a miracle. And I mean, it's a classic example. We don't think that we can perform them. And in A Course in Miracles, what happens is a miracle is recast and redefined, and it is any shift from the thought system of fear to the thought system of love. Fear being represented by the ego, which is our false sense of self.
That is beautiful. Can you please say that one more time? I think that is a beautiful definition. And I don't remember reading it quite that way, but thank you. So say it again.
Okay. Yeah.
A miracle is?
Yes, it's any shift from fear to love, from your dark to your light.
Ooh, that really lands. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it lands for me too, and that's the way Jesus presents it in A Course in Miracles. By the way, he is the author of A Course in Miracles, and it really lands. It really lands because it means it's accessible. That each and every one of us is, in fact, a miracle worker, because we can all make this choice, and it's a choice in the present moment that we make.
Okay, so I'm going to repeat that because it's so powerful. So a miracle is any shift from fear to love.
Mm.
And as you said, this shift always boils down to a choice. And a choice that you can make consciously at any moment in time. If you can do it in every moment in time, then what are you doing? You're creating an endless stream of miracles. Wow, that is a beautiful, beautiful vision.
Yeah, isn't it wonderful? And it took me more than one reading of A Course in Miracles, by the way, before that really, really started to sink in. The first time I read it, I just thought, okay, well, there's something about this. There's something within me that is resonating with this, and I don't quite know what. And it's something that I went through more than once. And when that finally really truly did hit, and the simplicity and the accessibility of that was just really a powerful experience.
Yeah, it is really amazing to me. And so there's another book that I also have called A Course of Love. Now, I don't know if it's written by the same people, but I believe it's published by the same group. Have you seen that one?
I've heard about it and I've never been through that. So yeah, I don't quite know enough to speak to that one.
Yeah. Anyway, well, A Course in Miracles. Every time I here's a beautiful thing that I like to do. I just pick up the book and just open to a random page and read a few paragraphs. And there's always some amazing wisdom there that hits me in a way that I can't really describe. One
Yeah.
of the challenges that we have, and I'm sure you've experienced this, is words themselves. They seem to be limited in what they say. And yet here we are trying to describe this concept of a miracle, and we have to use words to do it because we haven't elevated our consciousness enough to a high enough level that we're able to just kind of grok with each other without the verbal communication.
Mhm. Yeah, and we may have. I love that word, by the way, grok.
Grok.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great word.
Yeah, and we may have glimpses of that. We may have experiences of grokking or of what we might call by any number of names here in the world, like telepathy or thought transfer or something like that. We may have these glimpses, but as long as we continue to identify with a separate sense of self, which is what the ego is, then we're not able to do that on a consistent and ultimately a constant basis. That we block ourselves, really.
Yeah, right. Okay, so we've talked a lot about different stuff here, and I guess
Mhm.
the way I'd like to bring ourselves to a close is to talk a little bit about uh, how we go about healing ourselves, how we go about getting to that place where we can just release these obligations and reclaim the truth of who we are. Why don't you share a little bit about how you do that? What do you teach, and how you coach people in that regard?
Oh, yeah. Well, here in the world, healing takes many forms. I mean, we automatically think of healing the physical body, which you may or may not happen as a result of true healing. And it usually does. I mean, it usually does. But it's about healing the mind, the focal point, the cause rather than all of the effects of which the physical body is but one effect. When we accept, and this is how we do it, we accept healing for ourselves. What I mean by that is accepting that we are perfect, healed, and whole, just as we were created. And one of the most powerful prayers that I find coming out of my mouth all the time when I teach about A Course in Miracles specifically is a prayer to allow truth to be just as it is, to allow truth to be just as it is. And in doing that, if we allow that, we set all of our preconceived notions to the side. We don't have to clobber them into submission. We can simply set them to the side. And that's what the entire spiritual path, all of its manifestations are all about, is this disidentifying with the ego, disidentifying with a sense of individual self that we have rammed down our throats in the world. This is what we've been talking about
Hmm.
for sure.
Yeah, I think that you talk about the ego, and I think that's really our biggest enemy is the ego mind. Even though its purpose is to help guide us through the physical realm and navigate the world and so forth, and keep us safe, it has to do this by being in a state of fear all the time. It has to be on the lookout for dangers and all this kind of stuff. And so a big part of our growth, a big part of our elevation, our illumination, our enlightenment, if you like, has to do with recognizing how that ego keeps us stuck in the conditioning and in the oh, you can't do that because if you do, you're going to upset so and so, or you can't do this because that person's going to get angry, or all these little stories that are going on in our head. They're all fear based.
Mhm.
And 99% of them, well, maybe not quite that many, but many of them, I'd say close to 99%, are false. They're false. It's just simply not true. Most people are too busy with their own lives to pay attention to what you're doing or what I'm doing. You know,
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
they might be paying attention, but they're usually not judging us the way we imagine they are.
Right.
So we can quiet the ego mind, and when we quiet it through meditation or whatever practice you like to use, that's when you can get connected into the heart and the soul, which is where your true self resides. And it's from that place that you get to see the perfection.
Mhm. And yeah, it's this process, whatever that looks like for you, of dropping those defenses or setting them aside, even if it's only for a brief time. Because right here in the present moment, we have a choice, as we've talked about, between love or fear. Everything else that we appear to choose is a derivative of that one choice. Is it
Right.
fear-based or is it love? And of the two, love or fear, only one is real. The other is not. It's
Yeah.
not.
Now, guess which one's real, folks?
Yeah. And it's well, it can be a process, of course, right? Because
Yeah.
we can say that, okay, only love is real, only truth is, right? We can say that, but do we put it into practical application? Because that is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. That's where it's at, is in the practical application of ideas, because it's not enough, as we discover, just to understand something intellectually. But what I love about A Course in Miracles is it has as a purpose turning the thought system of the ego completely on its head so that we can abandon it completely, which
Right.
is very cool.
You know, and it's interesting. I think the word transcendence, which is related to the book that I talked about us at the beginning, is really, in my view, about transcending the ego.
Hmm.
It's not about destroying the ego or making the ego go away, because as long as we're in our physical bodies and living in a physical plane, we probably will need the ego on some level to help us with what it does. But we don't have to listen to the ego in every single moment. And as you say, if we can just keep bringing ourselves back to love, then 99% of the fear-based thinking of the ego will just quiet down on its own. And if there's a real danger out there, like, hey, look out, you're going to get hit by a bus, well, then, yeah, we want to pay attention to that. But otherwise, what do we really want to do? We want to choose love. And so I think that's what transcendence really means to me now,
Okay.
is about moving above or beyond or whatever the ego itself.
I really like that. It's really interesting. So, those of you watching this has been a dialogue amongst the authors of this book, because the subtitle is Transcendent Men, Real Stories. So, it has been an ongoing topic of conversation. Okay, what does transcendence actually mean? And I have to tell you, David, I had no idea really when I first started out. I just thought, well, I don't really know. I don't really know.
Yeah.
And I came to a point where transcendence to me was in simply showing up and showing up and continuing to teach. And I don't know who may be listening. We don't know. We don't know. But it's my job as a teacher to continue to show up and to proclaim that love is real, fear is not. Of those two, only one is real. And by the way, which you wind up choosing will determine so much. And by the way, we're also not talking about love as in romantic love of this world, what passes for love, a weekend fling.
Right.
That's not what we're talking about.
Exactly right. Exactly right. We're talking about capital L love,
Yeah.
involved on the capital SELF person, you, your
Mhm.
essence. SELF, by the way, when I capitalize it, to me means a spiritually empowered life force.
Mm.
It's a backronym that I like to use.
Love it. Yeah. I love that. I love that.
Well, Thomas, this has been a fabulous conversation. I just want to say thank you so much for being with me. But before we go, I want to ask if there's, what words of wisdom would you like to share in closing with our guests and our people who are watching the recording?
All right. Well, yeah, thank you. I would love to just share with you that there's never been a better time than right now to explore your spirituality. There's never been a better time than right now to take a deep dive with yourself. How can I say that? There's never been another time. You know when to do that. So if you're feeling that inclination, know that the spiritual path takes courage and it takes vulnerability, and you have help available. It is readily available, and it has always been there. It's there now, and it will be ready for you when you are ready for it. And all you have to do is ask.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And so, ladies and gentlemen, I'd just like to let you know that you can find out more about Reverend Tomás Garza's work and his calling on his website at tomasgarza.com. Feel free to go check that out. And I also want to just thank you for being here and watching today's program or watching the recording, whatever it is you're doing. And I'd like to remind everybody that you can find the recordings of this and every other episode of Life Mastery TV on my website at lifemasterytv.com. That's life-mastery-tv.com. I just want to remind you that in this life, commitments and obligations seem pretty unavoidable. You're going to run into them everywhere. However, when we raise our awareness and stay aligned with who we really are, then we can choose our obligations consciously, so that they all somehow serve our highest good and the highest good of all those around us. In this way, we stay connected to our spiritual nature and never lose sight of the real reason that we are here. With that said, I'd like to remind you to practice the Life Mastery mantra, which goes like this. I gratefully forgive the imperfect being I have been in the past. I gratefully accept the magnificent being I am right now. I gratefully welcome the evolved being I am becoming in each new moment. So until we meet again, I'm David McLeod, your Life Mastery Coach, wishing you love, light, and blessings on your continuing journey. See you again next time on Life Mastery TV. Bye-bye.